Very warm good evening to all our viewers and welcome to the Evening Review Show. I'm Matthias Ofiku, news editor of the Namibian Sun newspaper. Well, of course, Namibia is in mourning. All of us are mourning following the death of President Hage Geingob. Tribute messages continue to pour in, and everyone is really just taking stock and remembering how they interacted and how they were impacted by the leadership of President Geingob. And we have in studio tonight Ms. Sharonice Busch. She's the executive chairperson of the National Youth Council. Good evening and welcome, ma'am.
Good evening, Matthias, and good evening to our viewers.
Well, I would have liked to have you in studio on a more happier occasion or more happier topic, but be that as it may, as we mourn, we also celebrate the life of this political icon of our country. Of course, you cannot mention Namibia and its 34 years without mentioning the name Hage Geingob. You've come through the student leadership ranks, the youth political ranks. You are now at the NYC. You've also had your moments of interactions with President Geingob. Tell us about this man a bit, from a youth perspective. How was he like? As young people, we feel that the older generation, they are on their own, they are not bothered about youth matters and so on. Tell us a bit about Hage Geingob, the man, and his interest in youth affairs.
The late president had a very unique quality that had the ability to interact with various audiences, and him connecting with young people was something that came naturally. It was effortless, and you always see video clips, especially in this time of mourning, of the president interacting with young people with his signature dance move, for instance. I think a dance move that we will never forget. And the character of the president was such that he had the ability to do environmental scanning and understand who he's interacting with and adapt to settings where it is required to be less informal, but still be able to speak as a head of state and as a commander-in-chief, and perhaps also direct. And he had a sense of humor, even if some would consider dry humor. But he had the ability of cracking jokes and perhaps sometimes appearing as a very strong-willed person. Especially if you're timid, you would want to say he'd sound very strong in the sense of, am I being bullied? But he was such a towering figure, also with a very deep voice. So the president, through my years of interacting with him, comes from the days of leading NANSO as a Secretary General, throughout NANSO progressing into youth politics. I then had the distinct privilege to serve in our president's private office as one of his personal assistants, in particularly working very closely with the communications department. So I had the privilege of working with both press secretaries, the first one being the current ambassador, Albertus Agumuk, and then subsequently Dr. Alfredo Hengari. And we were responsible for the president's communication and stakeholder engagement, and also opening up really State House to the media, where President had a standing tradition of having media invited to high-level engagements at State House. So during my experiences with President, I had the distinct honor of seeing him not only as a statesman, but I had the opportunity to see him as a president, leading the SWAPO party, Hage the politician, and also had the opportunity to see him as Hage the people's president when he had his community interactions. President also had a soft spot for Namibia's elderly, and I think in this period of mourning we can also see how the elderly is reacting, because continuously at platforms where the head of state could influence policy, he ensured that through our social protection safety nets, our elderly were a part of those considerations through the continuous increment in the pension that they receive by the state. So that really shows you that there was a level of human element by our president, that he was just not in an ivory tower. President also publicly informed the nation that of his salary, a certain portion goes back to the community. And for me, it really is linked to the premise of the president that in his political rhetoric over the years that we have come to know, the president has also a formula of accountability plus transparency equals trust. And when you look at some of the actions during the tenure of the president, you can really see that it was not only political rhetoric, that there was action that was coupled with some of this political rhetoric that we have heard from the president.
Yeah.
And so when we are celebrating the life of president, the late president, it is really to say that it was a man that walked the talk, in particularly including his tenure, a strong commitment around greater inclusion of young people and youth participation. And for me, that is particularly a proud moment for us as young people in this very, very difficult time that we are finding ourselves as a nation, to say that President Hage Geingob was a champion for young people. He believed in our potential. He knew how to identify talent, nurture that talent, but meaningfully give us space to contribute, meaningfully give us a seat at the table, to ensure that we help in this process of nation building, but also become a part of the solutions insofar as in influencing and shaping policy imperatives. And I think Namibia is the first country on the African continent that have created an office, particularly in the president's office, which is the youth advisor, which then at the highest level of the state to influence policy at that level. So really, Matthias, like you've said, it is a very sad time for our nation. Never did we think that he opened the year saying it's the year of expectations, that this is where we would find ourselves in. But surely, in as much as he has left us, there is a lot that we must take as we try to move on from here, from the lessons from the values and the principles that he has stood for, to help us become better leaders that can continue leading Namibia. Yeah.
There's always been this general feeling that all these appointments of young people across the government system is a more token type of arrangement. In your experience, are you genuinely at the table to contribute, and it's ideas that are taken up as policy matters, or it's just a thing of you sit around the table and just wait for anything that comes your way?
Surely those that would say it's tokenism, it really must be from a place of being uninformed or either ignorant. When especially we as young people who make up a majority of Namibia's population have an outcry around our dissatisfaction on how our country is currently looking at insofar as our socio-economic indicators and the state of the nation. When an opportunity arises, no matter from which political divide you come from, for a young person to represent the voices of young people, I think it is our duty collectively to ensure that that young person succeeds, because really it is an issue of ensuring that it then becomes a generational pull to ensure that we not only work for our generation, but for those that come after us. Matthias, I also believe that there is no trial and error when it comes to youth participation. Young leaders, young people in particular, must have the opportunity to learn and grow. So it can't be tokenism when a young person is given an opportunity, one, to understand how a system works, how an administration works, how public policy works, and be able to grow from there. If leaders that are in government today, that started when they were young, were not given that opportunity, for instance, our Prime Minister, when she started, was almost the same age like Honorable Patience Masua. And look where Prime Minister is today, because of the investments that was made, ensuring that she was nurtured, she was empowered, she was trained, she was equipped and understood how administration works. Today she's head of government business, a competent, articulate Prime Minister that is running our head of government, but started off at the tender age by being a Director General of the Namibia Planning Commission. Thereafter assumed a big responsibility by being a Minister of Finance, but she started when she was a young person. So surely those that, I do not want to even call them naysayers, those that are saying it's tokenism do not understand that the importance of mentorship, the importance of training, and the level of preparedness that goes into referring to leaders of tomorrow. If we are leaders of tomorrow, surely we should be trained in this period where opportunity arises for us to understand processes. Another rhetoric of President Geingob, which is extremely important, which we have seen manifested during the seamless transition that we have seen, is his precipice that he premised on governance architectures that must be based on systems, processes, and institutions. I think when the Chief Justice handed over the instruments of power to His Excellency Nangolo Mbumba, it was a testament to President's belief that a country must have these fundamental principles in place that shape our democracy, that shapes our governance architecture. Yes. And Namibia was lauded for a seamless transition in less than an hour, where the new head of state was appointed, a new vice president was appointed. And that really gives us an impression that a democracy as young as ours is, with all our challenges, is also doing extremely well. I mean, recently, Matthias, we have read the Senegalese elections being postponed. And the uproar that came with that. And I think in the case of Namibia, we must celebrate some of these successes that really puts us at the helm of being a country on the continent as a best practice insofar as protecting our constitutional democracy. But back to the issue of tokenism, I strongly disagree with it. I do believe that if there's one thing the President has done exceptionally well, is allowed young people to have dedicated spaces where even if we make mistakes and even if we fail forward with the understanding that it's a level of preparation that must go in place, an investment that must be made into young people. Namibia is being lauded and celebrated when you go outside of the continent, when you go into international forums, for having young people, young voices for the first time in parliament, whether they're from the ruling party, whether from the opposition. But these young people have an opportunity now to speak on the issues that affect us. And this is what we want. For the first time, we are being lauded that we have an executive, a deputy minister, that is a young person that has the opportunity to be exposed to cabinet and how the executive arm of government works. And so really for me, and for instance myself, I, as the President's office, as a personal assistant, through training, through mentorship, and through investments being made in my development as a young leader, I'm now entrusted with a public entity, which is the National Youth Council, a public entity that's responsible for youth development. If these investments do not take place by investing in young people, preparing them, then when should young people have the opportunity to understand how a country is run? What is leadership? What is required of you to lead? How do you make informed decisions insofar as public policies, allocating resources, and all these processes that goes into effective governance?
Sharonice, we'll have for a short break, but I want you to gather your thoughts as we go for the break on as much as the President premised his attention on youth advancement. I'm sure there's several concerns he had about how the youth do their things. Surely it was genuine concerns, and there's nothing wrong with it. So I'd like you to gather your thoughts on that. To our viewers, we head for a short break, and we'll be back to continue this conversation.
Neo Paints has established a 67-year Namibian legacy, creating personalized paint solutions that blend quality and innovation for the Namibian people. We pride ourselves in being a 100% Namibian-owned company, investing in our country and our people by employing and empowering true Namibians. With every brushstroke, Neo Paints commits to our quality guarantee and always delivering a coat of excellence. At Neo Paints, we always stay true to our country. We are as Namibian as you.
Well, welcome back from the short break. Sharonice, concerns are always there in any system. The President would always say, young people, you must create your own jobs. And he would always get a backlash from the public, especially from young people or from different sectors of the community. And surely at times he had genuine concerns to say, perhaps try this route instead of going this route as young people. What was your pickup, some of the pickup points in that for you?
Firstly, it's also, I think, President was generally trying to create, narrow the gap between leaders and especially young people. For instance, the late President Geingob was the first head of state who was extremely active on social media. President created a Twitter account, President had a Facebook account, but mostly on Twitter, you'd find there's instances where he genuinely interacted with a few young people.
So was he doing this, was he tweeting himself, or was his press team doing this?
There's moments when the president would retweet or respond to certain tweets himself, but generally the content is curated and is managed in such a fashion that it runs seamless. But also, one of the, I think, especially when we refer to his impact on youth leadership and the young people, a signature activity of the head of state was also the engagement he had with young people at the National Theatre of Namibia, where he had engagement directly with young people, just him alone. I remember it vividly because at that time I was still working with him. And at that platform, for instance, in line with what you were saying, there was a lot of also pushback from young people with genuine concerns. It's because that time it was also presidential elections, to say, is just this a platform for, again, is it perhaps a tokenistic platform, or is it genuinely you engaging with us as a head of state? And I remember vividly the president also had a reaction to say, if you're not happy with me, go vote me out. But for now, so, you know, he had those moments where he was himself and would respond in a fashion that you would sometimes also wonder, what is he saying? So, for instance, with regards to statements that he'd make, such as young people create your own jobs, it's not necessarily saying that that young people are perhaps lazy, I would want to put, but to say that to be challenge ourselves to also become a little bit innovative. If there's one thing that the president throughout his administration mentioned over and over again, is for Namibia to leapfrog. And in all his national plans, in the Harambee Prosperity Plan, he always emphasized the importance of Namibia moving along insofar as the fourth industrial revolution. And when you look at that and the president's appreciation of how the world is moving, it is also a challenge for us as young people. One, if there's a need to reskill or upskill, to ensure that we move along with how the world is changing. So when President makes statements like that, I don't think it was him being completely unaware of the current situation that young people find ourselves in. I mean, President is briefed not only by his advisors, but President has a cabinet. He has there's entire functionaries in state that briefs him. So for a president to say that surely does not mean that he's not aware that young people have issues such as access to funds, the issue of collaterals. Like I said, when he's in his moment and he's speaking as himself and perhaps goes off the cuff, that's when he'd say these statements that particularly would have you react a bit untoward and maybe also struggle to digest, to say, did he really mean that? But I do want to say that there's a level of appreciation that the president had around how the world is moving, because President was a global citizen. I think already, Matthias, just how the world is reacting to the passing of our late president shows you that Namibia's position on the international community has shifted significantly. World leaders since his passing have reacted by way of message of condolences, extending and sympathizing with the nation, the First Lady and the family of the late president. And it really shows you that in the international community, Namibia has become a country of significance, that in his attempt to become a global citizen, he dared us and challenged us as young people also to become globally competitive. And in so doing, especially when he makes statements that sometimes would not sit well with us young people, it was rather to challenge us to think outside of the box and go outside of our comfort zones, insofar as also changing the landscape that we find ourselves as young people.
Yeah. Considering your journey in youth leadership, what would you say is the hampering factor as far as bridging the gap between young and old, as far as that is concerned? What is it that we are still not getting right as a country?
I've been in the youth leadership space for slightly over 10 years. I started quite early in high school already, where I became very active in the Children's Parliament, the Junior Town Council, NANSO, Swapopati Youth League, and it has really been an organic growth to where I am today. And I think our progress is incremental. There's some small progress that we have seen, but but there's also, like you've said, some challenges that we must be mindful of. And that challenge for me is continuous efforts that we need to do insofar as addressing intergenerational dialogue between generations, because it's ageism, Matthias, and with that there's a lot of challenges that we still need to address. For instance, you have a generation, I'm from the 90s, I'm a born in 1990, but the generation after me is the millennials. And even with us, there's a different dynamic. For instance, the millennials are the generation that is infotech driven. These are the guys that can do everything on their phone. We are still slightly a bit old school. But when you speak of our interaction with the older generation, it really becomes a challenge, because most of the times young people are seen as a threat where we shouldn't be. We should be seen as a resource, where young people have the energy, we have the know-how, the skill, because we have now been through our democracy. We have now been given the privilege that previously was not there, to have access to quality education. So when young people are competent, when young people are resourceful, and especially when young people are very creative in getting things done, I feel that sometimes young people are still viewed as a threat, and therefore there's sometimes these deliberate attempts to kind of like make sure that we just remain still at the peripheries. And that really should, for me, it should really change. I think the more we allow young people to get to the tables and offer contributions, the more we'll be able to see. Because, Matthias, one of the challenges that we've had in our country is really around implementation. We have glossy documents, we have glossy policies, and the challenge always is really premised on what is wrong then with implementation. And so when you have a dispensation of young people in our country that online have very interesting conversations around our socioeconomic status, and also how activism in itself has changed. You can see that activism for young people have changed significantly. Activism now has gone online more than it's offline. So with how the world has changed especially, part of the challenges is that intergenerational dialogue must happen more frequently, that young people shouldn't be regarded as trouble because of especially the way in young people interact. We're unapologetic. Sometimes young people are viewed as crude because they are not politically correct, or they do not want to speak with blanket statements. They call things for what it is, and they really have this call out culture as well. So sometimes young people are also viewed as troublemakers, and as them, and as those that only want to point out what is wrong, but not those that want to be a part of the solutions. And I think those, for me, those are still the issues that we have in our country insofar as intergenerational dialogue. But the minute our leaders also view young people as positive actors that have a role to play in nation building, in solving the problems that we have, in this concept of the president of the Namibian House, surely we must ensure that intergenerational dialogue becomes meaningful, and we open up more spaces for young people. We can't stop with what we currently have. We need to ensure more spaces are made up, and that those spaces are diligently occupied by deserving young people that are competent, that are skilled, and that can help us take Namibia forward.
Just as we wrap up, you mentioned that young people should be seen as resources. So as young people, how should we see the older generation? Because it needs to be a two-way street.
Absolutely. I do believe that our leaders that have fought very hard for us to gain our political freedom are also, to a certain extent, leaders that have a level of wisdom. I don't believe that we should necessarily view them as archaic, as leaders that perhaps have run out of ideas, because they come from a different struggle, they come from a different era. Their challenges aren't our challenges. For instance, they are more tolerant, that in my experience and my interaction with our elderly leaders. They are much more tolerant. They have a level of discernment, a level of carrying each other that we do not have as a younger generation. As a younger generation, what I've seen is we do not have the ability to celebrate one another's successes, especially when we see that a young person has fast, in a very short period of time, made significant progress. we still have, and whether we like it or not, Matthias, it's something that that is really a challenge amongst us. We have this pull me down syndrome, where we want to label and question the success of a fellow young person, whereas the older generation, you'd hardly find that. They really carry each other. For instance, the way in which we as young people are easy to fight one another shows you that we have a lot to learn from them. So I consider them as a generation that there is a level of wisdom that we can get from them. And as we come together, it is for us to ensure that we look at what values we can draw from as generations that are important in ensuring that Namibia is led, but led in a manner that is sustainable, in a manner that makes us competitive, in a manner that makes us respected. I do believe that there is no right or wrong in a conversation of especially intersectionality of generations, but it is having the understanding that there must be a level of maturity, because it's about our country, and like the late president says, this is the only country that we can call home. So these are serious things, Matthias, because it doesn't affect just you and I. It affects our kids. It affects the generations that will lead Namibia when we are not here. So these are very serious conversations that we shouldn't take lightly, and it requires a level of, especially as my generation, the millennials and the Gen Zs, is our ability to have foresight, to know that the decisions we take today, it's not for our benefit. And that is something that we need to talk about. It's decisions, when we are entrusted with responsibilities, it is not to benefit ourselves, but to also learn from our elders, to know that they made sacrifices. Most of them sacrificed their youth fighting for this country, but they did so knowing that it will benefit us. So when we are entrusted with national responsibility, do we have the aptitude to know that we must lead with that level of understanding, that it must benefit the generations that will come after us, and not perhaps have this leadership approach to, if I don't benefit, no one else can benefit. Really about becoming leaders that put our people first, leaders that are led leaders that lead with an understanding that it's about service, that it is about work, and not necessarily leading from the front, but leading from behind, to ensure that when, in principles of leadership, they say leaders eat last, because you must make sure that the people that you take care of are fully taken care of first. And so these are the issues that, as the upcoming generation, we should reflect on, to say, are we there yet? And if not, what kind of interventions and what kind of conversations should we have that will prepare us to lead this country in the near future?
Well, Sharonice, thank you very much for your time this evening and for your insights. And as we all mourn, let's also not forget to celebrate what he stood for.
Thank you very much, Matthias.
Well, to our viewers, that's it from the Evening Review team. See you again tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a pleasant evening.